He wakes up at 4:47 in the morning. Not because an alarm told him to. The alarm was set for 5, but his body stopped making it that far sometime in the last decade, and he has long since accepted this as simply the way things are. He lies still for a moment in the dark, staring at the ceiling he has stared at 1,000 times before, listening to a silence that is not quite silence, the hum of a refrigerator, the distant sound of wind, the particular stillness of a house that has not yet been asked to do anything. And then, without drama, without announcement, he gets up. He puts on the same clothes he always puts on at this hour. He walks to the kitchen. He makes coffee. Strong. No sugar. He stands at the window while it brews and watches the street below, empty, quiet, lit only by the pale orange glow of a single street lamp. Nobody is awake yet. That is the part he never admits he looks forward to. There is something about this hour that belongs only to him. Before the phone starts. Before the day makes its demands. Before he has to be the version of himself that everyone else needs him to be. For exactly 12 minutes, the time it takes the coffee to cool enough to drink, he is just a man standing at a window. Not a father. Not a provider. Not the one with the answers. Just a man. And then the coffee is ready, and the moment is over, and he becomes himself again. The self the world gets to see. He has never told anyone about those 12 minutes. It has never occurred to him that there would be a reason to. That, in itself, is worth noticing. This is not a story about weakness. It is a story about a particular kind of man, the kind who has spent decades being the person others lean on, who has quietly made himself into something load-bearing, and who somewhere along the way lost the ability or perhaps the permission to lean on anyone himself. You probably know a man like this. You might be a man like this. And if you are, you already know that the hardest part is not the weight. The hardest part is that you cannot remember when you decided to carry it alone, or whether you ever actually decided at all. Watch him move through a Tuesday. He is up before sunrise, as always. Coffee made. Last night's dishes cleaned before anyone else wakes. He checks the thing he always checks first. Not messages, not news, but the quiet inventory in his head. What needs doing today? What is behind? What he promised and has not yet delivered. The list is never finished. He has made his peace with this. He moves through the morning with the practiced efficiency of a man who has been running on routine for 20 years. If someone asks how he is doing on the way in, he says fine. He says busy. He says can't complain. And in that moment, he believes he is telling the truth. That is the part that is hardest to explain to anyone who has not felt it. It does not feel like hiding. It feels like accuracy. At work, he is the reliable one. The one people come to when something goes wrong. He does not panic. He does not make the problem about himself. He figures it out or he finds the person who can, and either way it gets handled and he moves on. His colleagues respect him deeply. Some of them fear him a little, in the way people sometimes fear competence. It sets a standard no one asked to be held to. None of them would guess that he drove to work this morning with his jaw clenched for 40 minutes. Turning a problem over in his mind that he has been turning over for 3 weeks now. A problem he has not mentioned to a single person. Not because there is no one to tell, but because telling it would mean admitting he does not yet have an answer. And that the not having an answer is the thing he has spent his entire life learning he is not allowed to be. This is where the story gets more interesting than it first appears. Because this man did not build himself this way. He was built, slowly, carefully, over decades, by a combination of things he was told, things he watched, and things that happened when he showed vulnerability and the world responded in ways he was never supposed to remember but never fully forgot. Researchers who study male identity formation describe something they call the emotional narrowing that happens to most boys before adolescence. Be strong. Handle it. Don't complain. Figure it out. These messages are not always spoken aloud. Sometimes they live in a father's shrug when a boy gets hurt and looks up expecting comfort. Sometimes they live in the silence that fills a room when a teenage boy admits he is scared, and no one knows what to do with that admission. Sometimes they are simply in the absence of any other model, in never once seeing the men around him acknowledge need, and drawing the only logical conclusion a child can draw, that men do not do that. That asking is failing. That needing is burdening. The lesson does not announce itself as a lesson. It arrives quietly and stays. And by the time a man is 45, or 55, or 60, it is no longer a lesson. It is simply who he is, or who he believes himself to be, which by that point is nearly the same thing. But here is the contradiction that lives at the center of this. And it matters. It is not simple enough to walk past quickly. This man wants connection. That is not a romanticized assumption. The research on male loneliness has become impossible to ignore. Men past 40 are among the loneliest groups in modern society, and the loneliness compounds rather than eases with age. Studies consistently show that most men over 50 cannot name a single person they would call in a moment of genuine emotional crisis. Not because they have no one in their lives, but because the act of making that call requires a kind of internal permission they were never granted. Yet these same men, the isolated ones, the self-sufficient ones, the ones running on 4 hours of real rest and 12 minutes of stolen peace at a dark kitchen window, these men feel the absence. They feel it when a long evening ends and there is no one to say anything real to. They feel it at birthdays that pass without a conversation that meant something. They feel it on Sunday afternoons when the house is quiet and the weight of it is sitting right there, waiting. They feel it. They just do not say so. And this is the cruel architecture of the problem. The very thing that would relieve the loneliness, being known, being understood, being allowed to say out loud that things are hard, is the thing every layer of conditioning has trained them to prevent. He is lonely because he will not be vulnerable. He will not be vulnerable because 50 years of evidence, real and misread and imagined, have taught him that vulnerability is not safe. And so the walls remain, and the weight remains, and the mornings remain quiet and unreachable and entirely his own. So what would it even look like for a man like this to ask for help? Not in a crisis. Men can often mobilize in a crisis because a crisis contains a task, and tasks are familiar territory. But in the ordinary, sustained, everyday sense, to say to another person, I have been carrying something for a long time and I am not sure I should keep carrying it alone. What would have to be true about the relationship, about the room, about his own interior, for those words to become possible? That is not a rhetorical question. It is an honest one. Because the answer is complicated by the fact that the emotional vocabulary required to express need, to name what you feel, to identify what kind of support would actually help, to believe that asking does not make you a burden, is a vocabulary that many men were genuinely never given the opportunity to develop. You cannot speak fluently in a language you were denied the chance to learn. That is not an excuse. It is a reality worth sitting with. There is a definition of strength that this man has carried his entire life. Strength is the absence of need. The measure of a man is what he can hold and how long he can hold it without letting the strain show. It is a definition he never questioned because no one around him questioned it either. But there is another definition, older, quieter, far less comfortable in its implications, which says that strength is the capacity for honesty, the ability to say what is real, even when it costs something, to remain open when every instinct says to close. That definition does not make the other one wrong. It just makes it incomplete. He is still at the window. The street outside has begun to fill now, a woman walking a dog, a neighbor's car reversing out of a driveway, the first sounds of the day assembling itself. His 12 minutes are over. He rinses his cup, sets it on the rack, turns to face what is next. Whatever he was thinking about at that window stays there. He does not bring it with him. That is not what men like him do. And somewhere in a part of himself he visits less and less often. He knows the weight is there. He has always known. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, he wonders what it would feel like to set it down. Not forever. Not dramatically. Just long enough to breathe. To let someone else see what he is carrying, without needing them to carry it for him. He does not know whether that would be weakness. He is no longer entirely certain it would not be strength. And that uncertainty, quiet, unresolved, sitting beneath everything, may be the most honest thing about him.